Why did the air feel heavier the moment she stepped off the helicopter? Sarah Martinez adjusted the strap of her duffel as the rotor wash whipped sand into her eyes. 30 pairs of eyes locked on her, sharp, unforgiving, weighing every ounce of her presence. They didn't see her calloused hands or the quiet strength in her stance. No, what they saw was what she wasn't. She wasn't one of them. The others stood tall in loose formation, shoulders broad, hair cropped to uniform perfection. Men carved from steel, or at least pretending to be Navy SEALs with their cold stillness. Army Rangers with smirks like they'd already conquered the world. Marine recon hulks who looked like they could shoulder an armored truck if asked. Predators sizing up the stray who'd wandered into their den. And then, her, 5'6", 135 pounds. A face hardened not by arrogance, but by memories no one else could see. Memories that had kept her awake on the flight, hands trembling, not from nerves, but from being trapped again in a T&D metal tube 30,000 feet above ground, fighting ghosts she'd tried to bury for 3 long years. Well, the voice slithered from behind her. She turned, already knowing what she'd find. A man the size of a mountain with a Texas drawl and a grin that never touched his eyes. Looks like they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now. The chuckles around him dug deeper than any insult. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, her breath sharpen. But she said nothing. She'd heard it before, in basic and advanced courses. In every room where she was one of the few women, she had grown used to silence being her only weapon. And then, silence of a different kind. The kind that made hardened men straighten. Boots clicked, posture shifted, because he had arrived, Jake Morrison. The stories had painted him like a myth more shadow than man. A SEAL commander who could cut through enemy lines like he was born for it, who'd led rescues no one else would dare, who had never once left a man behind. His reputation was a weight of its own, and when he stepped from the main building, the air seemed to bend around him, his eyes ice blue, sharp as a sniper's scope scanned the group like he already knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their deepest secrets, until they landed on her. For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of his gaze like a knife through armor. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't doubt. It was the look of a man stripping her down to her very bones. Martinez. Her name wasn't spoken, it was delivered. A challenge. Front and center. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she stepped forward, every nerve burning under 30 sets of eyes. He circled her slowly, the way a predator circles prey. Unreadable, untouchable. "Tell me, Martinez," he said finally, voice low but caring. "What makes you think you belong here?" The question didn't hang. It weighed, heavy, choking. She could almost feel the other candidates leaning in for her stumble. Sarah lifted her chin. She'd had years of practice holding her ground, but this was different. This was the crucible. The line between acceptance and humiliation. "I don't think I belong here, sir." Her voice was steady, controlled. She drew breath like it was fuel. "I know I do." A ripple of derision moved through the crowd, a snort, a cough of disbelief. But Jake's expression never changed. His face was a wall, carved by battles no one here could fathom. "Confidence is good, Martinez," he said finally. "Let's see if you can back it up." He gestured, and the compound seemed to awaken. The obstacle course stretched before them, brutal in its design. Rope climbs, wall traversals, barbed crawl spaces. It wasn't just training. It was the graveyard of arrogance. "Everyone," Jake barked. "Gear up. Warm-up starts now. Warm up." That word alone sank like ice into her chest. Warm up, when men twice her size were already stretching muscles carved by war. Warm up, when every smirk said she wouldn't last an hour. The next moments blurred into pain. Sweat, stone, rope tearing. At her palms, she threw herself at each obstacle with everything she had. Not for them, not even for Jake, for herself. For the ghost that had followed her here, but halfway up the 30-foot rope climb, her hands betrayed her, tremors still lingering from the flight, from memories clawing up from the dark, grip slipping. She lost hold, sliding down 6 feet before catching herself. Rope scorched her palms fire. The laughter below cut sharper than any burn. Maybe they've got a secretarial position open. The voices stabbed. Her chest burned hotter than her hands. But she climbed again, teeth clenched, vision blurred. She forced herself upward until her hand smacked the bell at the top. Respectable time, not impressive, and she knew it when she rappelled down. Whispers drifted through the air like poison. Diversity higher. Political correctness gone wrong. She'd wash out by Friday. Jake's voice cut through it like a blade. Prove to me you're not just here for a photo op, Martinez. It wasn't cruel. That was the worst part. It wasn't cruel. It was truth. The truth she'd whispered to herself in sleepless nights. The truth that lived like a parasite in her chest. Maybe she didn't belong. Maybe she couldn't. That night, she lay on a narrow bunk, the barracks filled with muffled laughter and stories from men who had already bled together, bonded over wars she'd never fought. Through thin walls, she heard them bet on her survival like she was already gone. 3 days max. She's got that deer-in-the-headlights look. I give her a week only because they'll baby her before they send her packing. Sarah clenched her fists, the ache in her palms still raw, but not as raw as the ache across her back. The tattoo stretched over scars no one had seen. Scars that told stories no one here would believe. Names burned into her skin, 13 of them. Names that weren't whispers or rumors. Names that were brothers. She closed her eyes, heard Rodriguez's voice in the dark, thick with blood and smoke. His last words weren't prayers. They were promises. Promises she had failed to keep until now. Tomorrow, she decided, would be different. Tomorrow, everything would change, but sleep didn't come easy. Memories pressed against her like walls closing in, a convoy in the dust, a valley erupting with fire, screams she couldn't silence, a young corpsman with nothing but a medic's bag and stubborn hands, crawling through chaos. She'd lived with those memories for 3 years. Every night a battlefield of its own. The helicopter ride had stirred it all. The altitude, the noise, the helplessness, and the fear that when it mattered, her body would betray her again. But still, she had promised. Morning broke with the desert sun cutting red across the compound at 0430. Boots thudded against gravel. Sarah was already running, pushing air into her lungs until her chest screamed. She wasn't competing with them. She wasn't proving anything. To them, she was running against herself, against the girl on the rope who almost let go, against a medic in the valley who wished she had. By the time the others stumbled out, she'd already logged 2 miles, alone, determined, a shadow moving faster than her demons. And yet behind every stride, behind every bead of sweat was the question she couldn't shake, the one that Jake Morrison had left hanging in the air like a blade over her head. What makes you think you belong here? She didn't have the answer yet, but she would, because the truth, the full truth, was something she hadn't told anyone, not yet. Why was she still awake when the compound slept? Moonlight stretched across the obstacle course, silver on the ropes and walls, shadows clinging to every angle. Sarah's breaths came harsh and sharp, her palms raw from another climb, her body aching with a punishment she chose herself. Official training had ended hours ago, but she wasn't done. She couldn't be. Every night, when the others collapsed into bunks, Sarah stayed, running, climbing, crawling, firing until her arms shook and her vision blurred. The laughter that haunted her in daylight faded in these hours. Here, alone in the desert dark, she belonged. The compound didn't know about the tremors in her hands. They didn't know about the ghost that woke her every time she tried to rest. They didn't know about the tattoo that burned like fire every time she showered in secret, hiding her back from view. But they would know the woman who refused to break. Weeks passed like this: sweat, pain, a body bruised and battered into something harder than steel. By the third week, Sarah Martinez wasn't the same candidate who had stumbled on a rope at 0430. While others still dragged themselves into consciousness, Sarah was already running. Her pace wasn't reckless. It was controlled, precise, her breathing steady, her stride measured. When she fired on the range, her shots tore through targets with surgical precision. A 3-round group at 300 yards, tight enough to cover with a coin. When she field-stripped a rifle, her hands moved without hesitation, steady now, as if the tremors had never existed, and the compound began to notice. From the observation tower, Jake Morrison watched, at first with suspicion, then with something else, something heavier. His ice-blue eyes followed her every move. The way she read terrain, the way she flowed through chaos, like it wasn't new, like she'd done it all before. The test came sooner than anyone expected. A full simulation, urban warfare, hostage rescue, civilians mixed with combatants, smoke grenades flooding alleys, pop-up targets disguised in shadows. The instructors designed it to overwhelm, to break even veterans with years of combat behind them. The candidates assembled in gear, rifles slung, nerves hidden under bravado. Sarah stood among them, quiet, focused, pulse steady. She'd run this mission in her head 100 times, though. No one knew. The briefing ended, the doors opened, chaos began. Gunfire cracked, civilians screamed, smoke clawed at her lungs. Contact left. She snapped into the radio, dropping to a knee as a target rose in the corner of her eye. 2 shots, center mass, before it even fully appeared. The squad surged forward. Former Marine Raider Tony Vasquez, who had once been the loudest voice against her, fell into step behind her without hesitation. Even he could see it, her awareness, her calm under fire. But then, disaster. Marcus Chun, Ranger, built like a linebacker, reckless in confidence, moved too fast, too eager. He rounded a corner without checking. The explosion ripped the air apart. Controlled? Yes. Simulation? Yes. But the blast was real enough. Chun went down screaming, blood spilling across the floor from jagged shrapnel tearing through his leg. For a moment the squad froze. Smoke thickened. Gunfire thundered. Panic bit into the edges of discipline. But not Sarah. She moved. 30 yards of open ground, rounds snapping overhead, smoke grenades detonating. She didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for cover. She sprinted straight into the storm. What she did next would be whispered about for months. She reached Chun's side, gloves slick with his blood, before anyone else even processed what happened. Her rifle barked from one hand, suppressing fire precise and ruthless, while the other hand tore at her medkit. A tourniquet snapped tight against his thigh. Her voice cut through the chaos, calm, commanding, absolute. I need covering fire and an extraction route. Now, the authority in her tone silenced doubt. Even Vasquez, who once laughed at her, obeyed without question. Later, he'd admit he forgot she wasn't his commanding officer. The firefight roared. 2 enemy actors tried to flank, sprinting through smoke. Sarah didn't look. She felt it. 2 sharp cracks, 2 headshots. They dropped before they could take a step closer, all while her hands worked Chun's wound with surgical precision. But it wasn't enough. His pulse was slipping, breath shallow. The tourniquet couldn't hold back the arterial bleed. And then Sarah did the unthinkable. Combat knife, alcohol from her kit. No hesitation. She cut deep, hands steady, clamping the artery with sterile forceps in seconds. Field surgery, under fire, flawless. Jesus Christ, Jake muttered into his radio, voice low, raw with disbelief. Where did she learn to do that? The extraction became a symphony of coordination. Sarah barking orders, rifle slung but ready, carrying Chun's 200-pound frame across her back. The squad moved with her rhythm, her momentum, like they'd trained under her for years. When they emerged from the kill house, Chun was alive, stable, conscious, his legs saved. The debriefing broke tradition. Normally, instructors ripped candidates apart, pointed at every mistake, every hesitation, but Jake found himself struggling to find one. Her tactics were flawless, her medical work professional grade, her leadership undeniable. When the others left, Jake lingered. That wasn't luck, he said, his eyes locked on hers. That was experience. Sarah's expression didn't flinch, guarded, hard. I've had good teachers, she said simply, but his gaze caught the flicker in her eyes, the way her hand unconsciously brushed against her back. A wall was there now, something deeper than training, something she wasn't ready to share, and Jake Morrison knew, with the cold certainty that only came from years of war, that Sarah Martinez was hiding something, something heavy, something written not in words, but in scars. Late at night, he pored over her file again and again. Her service record was clean. Too clean. Navy corpsman. One tour in Afghanistan, then nothing. Dates that didn't add up. Gaps unexplained. He looked out his office window at midnight and saw her running laps under the stars. Running like she could outpace her ghosts. Sarah Martinez was no ordinary candidate. He felt it deep in his bones, but the question gnawed at him. Would her truth make her the asset he needed? Or would it explain why someone like her, someone with skills forged in fire, had disappeared from the military for 3 silent years only to return now? Why did her hands freeze at the hem of her shirt? The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and humming fluorescent lights, sterile, cold, clinical. Sarah had been through dozens of military physicals before, but this one felt different, too thorough, too invasive. And when Dr. Patricia Reeves asked her to remove her shirt for the back examination, Sarah's lungs tightened like a vice. 3 weeks she had managed to keep her secret. 3 weeks of showering late, changing in corners, slipping away before anyone could catch more than a glimpse. 3 weeks of hiding the story carved into her skin. But there was no escape this time. Her fingers trembled once, just once, before she pulled the shirt over her head. The cool air bit against her scars. Then she turned. The tattoo revealed itself like a battlefield frozen in ink. 30 names stretched across her back, etched in elegant script, each framed by insignia's dog tags. Rifles, the Marine Eagle, at the center, over her spine, a battlefield cross. Rifle. Thrust into the earth, helmet balanced on top, boots at its base. Beneath it numbers, coordinates, marked in precise military notation. The room went silent. Even the fluorescent buzz seemed to vanish. Dr. Reeves drew in a breath. Professional. Tone cracked by something softer. That's quite a memorial, she swallowed. I'm sorry for your loss. Sarah said nothing. She couldn't. The weight of those names pressed down heavier than any rope climb or obstacle wall. 30 lives, 3 days, etched forever into her skin. Door clicked, boots on linoleum. Jake Morrison stepped inside, a manila folder in his hand, eyes on paperwork instead of the room. His voice carried the same command as always. Dr. Reeves, I need to verify some details before we finalize Martinez's clearance. The clipboard hit the floor with a metallic clatter. Jake froze, his eyes lifted, his face drained of color. The manila folder slipped from his hand, and then his gaze landed on her back. He didn't see ink. He saw ghosts, names he knew, numbers that were burned into his memory like scars. Rodriguez, Kim, Thompson, Williams. His voice cracked, each name falling like a hammer. His hand shook as he whispered the coordinates aloud. Sarah's shoulders tensed. She didn't turn. Not yet. She knew this moment would come. She had wondered, since the day she arrived, if Jake would recognize them, if he would remember the valley, the ambush, the fire. You were there. His words weren't a question. They were a verdict. Hollow, disbelieving, doctor. Reeves looked between them, sensing something electric and dangerous in the air. But she was no soldier. She didn't know the story. "I'll give you two some privacy," she murmured, slipping out with the soft steps of someone who knew when not to ask. Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating. Only then did Sarah turn, arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes met his for the first time since Afghanistan. "Corporal Sarah Martinez," she said, voice formal, distant. "2nd Battalion, 7th Marines." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Though I suppose you never got my name in the reports." Jake's knees gave out. He dropped into the nearest chair, a manila folder forgotten at his boots. For years, he had carried those 30 names like anchors tied to his soul. Every night, he had replayed that mission, wondering if he could have done more, if he could have moved faster, if he could have saved them. "I've carried those names for 3 years, he whispered. "Every night, I was supposed to save them. I was supposed to—" His voice broke. "I was supposed to get there in time." Sarah's throat tightened. She saw the lines etched deeper into his face. The sleepless nights carved into his eyes. He had carried it too. The same guilt, the same ghosts. "You saved 4 of us," she said quietly. Her voice trembled. But her words didn't. "Rodriguez died in my arms. But Williams made it home to his daughter because of you. Chum lived because you pulled him out of that burning Humvee. Morrison, no relation, lived long enough to see his son graduate because you carried him to the LZ while taking fire from 3 directions." Jake looked up. His eyes, always sharp and cold, now shimmered with something raw, tears he'd never let himself shed. "But 9 didn't make it." His voice cracked again. "9 Marines died because I was 12 minutes too late." Sarah's reply was firm, gentle, but unflinching. "9 Marines died because we walked into an ambush." Jake flinched. "Someone leaked our route. Someone sold us out. It wasn't your 12 minutes, Commander. It was war. And war is hell. Sometimes good men don't come home." She swallowed hard, eyes burning. "But 4 did. Because of you." His jaw tightened. His body shook under the weight of her words. He had heard 1,000 condolences over the years. But this was different. This was someone who had been there. Someone who bled beside those names. Someone who understood. For Sarah, the memory replayed like fire, a convoy in the dust. A valley closing in with gunfire from 3 sides, RPGs tearing the air apart. 4 hours she had crawled through blood and smoke, moving from man to man with nothing but stubborn hands and a medic's kit, holding the line, refusing to leave them. When Jake's team arrived, it had been chaos incarnate, burning vehicles, bodies, gunfire raining down, and one young corpsman, still on her knees in the dirt, still fighting to keep her brothers alive. "I recommended you for a Silver Star," Jake said suddenly, his voice ragged. "But you vanished, left the course. Disappeared before the paperwork even cleared." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. It was hollow, empty. "I couldn't stay. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. Every time someone thanked me for my service, I wanted to scream." Her voice cracked, raw with years of silence. "I failed them. 30 Marines went out that day. Only 4 came back. How is that something to be proud of?" Jake rose to his feet, his chest heaving. "Because you held the line. Because when everything went to hell, you didn't break. You didn't run. You stayed. And you kept your people alive until help came." He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "Now, too, that's not failure, Martinez. That's heroism." Her tears broke then, hot and unrelenting, carving down her face. "I left because I couldn't carry the guilt anymore. 3 years in therapy. 3 years trying to believe I had done enough. But I couldn't believe it. Not really. Not until I came back." She swallowed hard. "Rodriguez made me promise before he died. He made me promise I wouldn't let it be meaningless. That I'd keep fighting, keep serving, protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I spent 3 years trying to forget that promise. But I couldn't. So here I am. The silence between them wasn't silence anymore. It was recognition. It was a bond forged in fire and loss, buried under guilt and now unearthed in this sterile room. Jake's voice was barely a whisper. The nightmares, do they ever stop? Sarah met his gaze. For the first time since that day, she saw her own reflection in someone else's eyes, someone who carried the same weight. No, she said simply, but they get easier to carry when you're doing something that matters. Why was she always drawn to the roof when sleep refused to come? The barracks below pulsed with silence, the kind that only comes at 3 in the morning when even the restless have finally given in to exhaustion. But Sarah Martinez sat on the edge of the roof, boots dangling, eyes fixed on constellations that seemed indifferent to everything below. The Nevada desert stretched endless, sharp, and cold. Each star above was a pinprick reminder of how small human lives really were. And yet, somewhere in that vastness, she still searched for answers, for absolution, for Rodriguez's voice carried in the night wind. The gravel shifted softly. A presence approached. She didn't turn. She already knew who was Corporal Martinez, Jake Morrison said quietly. It was the first time since Afghanistan he'd used her old rank. Her shoulders stiffened for a moment. She thought about pretending she hadn't heard. But her voice betrayed her, low and tired. I wondered if you'd remember. I don't forget the people I bled for, Jake said, his boots silent as he crossed the roof. Or the ones I've failed. Sarah's laugh was short, bitter. Most people try to forget the worst days of their lives. But you special operations types, you hold on to everything, don't you? He sat down beside her, not close enough to crowd her, but close enough that the desert air carried his breath. For a long time, he didn't speak. His eyes stayed fixed on the stars, like hers. I've carried those 30 names for 3 years, he admitted finally. Every mission briefing, every after-action report, every night when I close my eyes. I was supposed to save them, Sarah. That's what we do. We don't leave people behind. His jaw clenched. And I did. She turned then, moonlight catching the wet sheen in her eyes. You saved 4 of us. Her voice trembled. But her words were sharp, cutting through his guilt like glass. Rodriguez died in my arms, she continued, her throat tight, but Williams made it home to his daughter because of you. Chun lived because you pulled him out of that Humvee while enemy fire poured from 3 directions. And Morrison, she swallowed, forcing the name out, lived to see his son graduate because you carried him to the LZ with a bullet in your shoulder. Jake's face broke, the Iron Commander faltering into the man beneath. His voice cracked, raw. But I was 12 minutes too late. 12 minutes, Sarah. If I'd pushed harder, if I'd ignored command, if you'd arrived earlier, you would have walked into the same ambush that shredded us. She interrupted, firm despite the tears in her eyes. The Taliban had been tracking our routes for weeks. They knew exactly when and where we'd be. You would have died with us. The desert wind filled the silence, carrying grains of sand across the rooftop. Jake stared ahead, fighting the truth she'd laid bare. His hands flexed, his breathing uneven. For years, he'd replayed the mission, wondering how he could have been faster, smarter, braver. And now, she was telling him the one truth he couldn't face, that his survival and the 4 Marines he saved had been the only possible outcome. Sarah looked away, back to the stars. I left the Corps 6 months after that day, Jake said suddenly. His voice was flat, drained. They called it operational fatigue. I called it failure every time we got a rescue call. I saw your faces. Every time we were late, I remembered those coordinates. He let out a hollow breath. I couldn't carry it anymore, so I retired. And I ended up here, training ghosts. To take my place. Sarah's lips curved in a sad half-smile. I left too. Couldn't stomach the word hero when all I saw in the mirror was failure. I spent 3 years as a paramedic in Detroit, saving people who overdosed, who got caught in crossfire, telling myself I was still serving. Her eyes glistened. But every night, I heard Rodriguez's voice. Jake turned to her, quiet. What did he say? Her throat closed for a moment. The words she had carried in silence for years were heavy, sharp, dangerous, but under the stars, they spilled free. He was dying. Shrapnel had torn him apart. I couldn't fix it. He knew it. I knew it. She swallowed hard. But instead of begging me to tell his family he loved them, instead of asking me to promise I'd remember his name, he grabbed my hand. Her voice broke, raw with memory. He made me promise I wouldn't let his death turn me into a victim, that I wouldn't spend my life running from what happened, that the best way to honor the dead was to keep fighting for the living. The tears slid silently down her cheeks. And then God, he smiled, with his last breath. He smiled and told me he knew I was strong enough to carry that burden. The rooftop fell silent. Jake's chest tightened, something breaking loose inside him. The weight he had carried for 3 years shifted, not gone, but no longer crushing. Him alone. He was right, Jake whispered. Sarah looked at him, startled. You think you were terrified that day? His eyes met hers, unwavering. Every soldier is terrified. But you, what you did, crawling through fire, performing surgery with a combat knife, holding the line for 4 hours while RPGs rained down? His voice cracked. That wasn't training. That was courage. She shook her head, tears spilling. I didn't feel courageous. I felt broken. Every second, I thought I'd die, but I couldn't leave them. They were my brothers. And when you can't save everyone... She looked back to the stars, her voice soft. You save who you can. Jake's breath hitched. The words echoed against every mission he'd ever led. Every life saved, every life lost. Is that why you came back? He asked quietly. Sarah nodded. 3 years I tried to tell myself I'd done enough. That saving lives in Detroit made up for the ones I couldn't save. But every time I heard Rodriguez's voice, I knew I was lying. I wasn't honoring him. I was hiding. She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand. So I came here, not to prove something to them. Not to prove something to you. To prove something to myself. That I was still worthy of his promise. The desert wind gusted stronger now. Whipping across the rooftop, Jake rose slowly, then extended his hand down to her. You've already proven it, he said softly. To me, to the others, to yourself. You're not the same medic I pulled out of that valley. You're stronger, more focused. You turned pain into purpose. Her eyes searched his face, trying to believe him, trying to let go of the guilt that had gnawed her for years, slowly. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet, steadying her like an anchor. They started toward the stairwell, their boots crunching softly. Jake hesitated, then spoke. There's something you need to know about tomorrow's graduation. Sarah's pulse quickened. What about it? I've been authorized to make a special announcement. His voice carried weight, heavier than command. One that recognizes leadership under fire, that acknowledges potential beyond rank or record. Her steps faltered. Jake, no, there. Are others with more experience, more what? He stopped, turning to her. More years on paper? More decorations on their chest? Sarah. He shook his head, his voice steady and fierce. None of that matters when bullets are flying. What matters is what I saw in that kill house, what I saw in Afghanistan. You can lead, you can keep your people alive when everything goes to hell. And that? He paused, eyes locking on hers. That can't be taught. The rooftop conversation ended there, but its weight would carry into the morning, for both of them. Why did the briefing room feel like a courtroom? Rows of candidates sat in rigid silence, the desert sun spilling through narrow windows, dust hanging in the air. 22 of them remained. 30 had started. 8 were gone, their bunks stripped bare, their names scratched from the roster. Those who survived now sat at attention. Boots polished, uniforms sharp, eyes fixed forward, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Sarah Martinez sat in the back row, hands clasped tight against her knees, her pulse hammered in her throat. She wasn't afraid of failing anymore. That fear had burned away in the smoke of the kill house, in the rooftop confession under the stars. What gnawed at her now was different, an unease, a weight she hadn't yet named. Jake Morrison stepped to the podium. His presence filled the room the way thunder fills the sky. Without effort, without invitation, simply there, the murmurs died instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the still air. "Over the last 6 weeks, you've been tested in ways designed to break you, to strip you down to nothing and see what's left. No one moved. You've crawled through fire, carried the weight of brothers, and faced your own limits. Most of you came here with reputations built in blood and combat. Some of you had none at all, and yet you stand here now equal, survivors, candidates ready for deployment." The word should have stirred pride. Instead, Sarah's stomach twisted. Equal? Did he mean it? Did the others believe it? Or were they still waiting for her to stumble, to prove their early bets right? Jake paused. His ice blue eyes scanned the room. Then they landed on her. "But one among you has shown something beyond endurance, beyond skill." His voice sharpened. "One of you has demonstrated leadership. Not when it was convenient, not when it was safe, but when lives hung in the balance." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Heads turned. Sarah's breath caught. "Effective immediately," Jake said, his tone firm, unyielding. "Sarah Martinez is promoted to team leader for Alpha Squad's deployment to Eastern Europe." The silence that followed was electric, heavy, shocking, and then applause. It began with Marcus Chun, the ranger whose legs she had saved, his hands clapping hard, his face lit with raw gratitude. Then Tony Vasquez rose, the Marine raider who once mocked her, now standing tall in salute. Slowly others joined, some hesitant, some fierce, until the briefing room roared with recognition. Sarah stood slowly, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack. Her ribs, the sound washed over her, surreal, unreal, like she'd stepped into someone else's story. She felt every eye on her, but this time, it wasn't derision. It was respect, earned. Jake stepped down from the podium. He approached her with measured steps, the weight of command still heavy on his shoulders. In his hand gleamed a small insignia. "Team leader, Rodriguez would be proud," he murmured, pinning it to her uniform. His voice was quiet, but she heard it over the thunder of applause. Her throat tightened. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she forced her voice steady. "They all would be." She drew a sharp breath. "And for the first time in 3 years?" Her lips trembled into the faintest of smiles. "I think I'm proud, too." The clapping rose again, louder this time. But in that moment, Sarah wasn't hearing it. She wasn't seeing the faces of men who had once laughed at her, now saluting her. She wasn't even seeing Jake, whose eyes held something softer than command. She was seeing names, 30 names, carved into her skin, burned into her heart. 30 brothers and sisters who hadn't come home, and she whispered to them silently, "This is for you." The ceremony moved on. Other candidates recognized. Their orders delivered. The applause ebbed and flowed. But Sarah stood rooted in place, the insignia heavy on her chest, as if it carried the weight of every promise she had ever made. Later, when the room emptied and chatter filled the hallways, she lingered alone, fingers brushing the insignia. She thought of Rodriguez, his smile, blood in his teeth, his voice rasping that final promise. "Don't let this turn you into a victim. Keep fighting." And here she was, fighting still. The door creaked. Jake stepped inside. The room suddenly quieter. "With just the two of them, you don't look happy," he said. Sarah gave a small, sharp laugh. "I'm not sure what I look like. Shocked, maybe. Unworthy, definitely. He shook his head. Unworthy? You earned this, Martinez. Not with talk, not with politics, with fire, with blood. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. They follow you now, not because I told them to, because you prove you can keep them alive. Her chest rose. Fell. She wanted to believe him, needed to. But doubt still gnawed at her edges. You're wrong about one thing, though, Jake added. She frowned. What's that? His eyes, ice and steel, softened. Pride. It isn't something you wait to feel at the end. It's something you carry, even when you're broken. Especially when you're broken. That's what makes you dangerous. That's what makes you. Ready. For a moment, Sarah held his gaze, the air heavy with words unspoken. Then she nodded once, sharp, as if sealing a pact. When she finally left the room, the corridors felt different. The stares she caught weren't mocking anymore. They were measuring, respectful, some envious, but all acknowledging, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that helicopter. Weeks ago, she walked without feeling small, but later that night, as she stripped off her uniform in the privacy of her stall, the tattoo stared back at her in the mirror. 30 names, a battlefield cross, coordinates. The insignia on her chest was new. The scars on her back were permanent. And between them stretched a question she couldn't escape. Could she truly lead when the ghosts of her failures still marched beside her? She didn't know, not yet, but tomorrow she would begin to find out. Why did the plane feel quieter when it lifted off American soil? Sarah sat strapped into her seat, Alpha Squad around her, the roar of the engines filling the cavernous belly of the transport. But the noise wasn't what pressed on her chest. It was the silence, the heavy, unspoken understanding that for the first time, this wasn't simulation. There would be no rubber rounds, no instructors waiting to call time. Every order she gave from now on would ripple between life and death. Her fingers brushed the new insignia pinned to her chest. Team leader. It felt heavier than her body armor. She stared at it as if willing herself to believe it belonged there. Across from her sat Marcus Chun, his leg bandaged and healing bud. Strong enough to deploy, he caught her eye and gave her a nod. Not the smirk of the ranger who once dismissed her, but the quiet nod of a man who trusted her hands to hold his life. Next to him, Tony Vasquez leaned back, arms crossed, his usual bravado muted. He didn't speak, but every time Sarah's gaze flicked his way, he was already watching her. They trusted her now. That truth alone was more terrifying than their earlier mockery. Jake Morrison wasn't with them. He'd stayed behind, his role now limited to training the next class. But his words echoed in her chest. Low and certain, you can keep them alive. That's what makes you ready. The mission brief played again in her head. Eastern Europe, a fractured border town smothered in unrest. A local resistance leader had been captured, held by mercenaries with loyalties bought and sold in the shadows. Intelligence was shaky. Allies were unreliable, but the objective was clear. Extract the prisoner alive. The engines droned on. The men closed their eyes. Conserving energy, Sarah tried, but sleep was a battlefield she never won. Instead, her gaze drifted to the scars peeking from her sleeve, her hands resting over her chest. Beneath it all, she still felt the tattoo burning against her back. 30 names, 30 ghosts, coming with her into the field. When the plane touched down, night cloaked the airstrip. Cold wind bit through her gear, carrying the distant scent of smoke from somewhere unseen. The town loomed a few miles away, its skyline jagged with broken buildings and intermittent lights. Alpha Squad moved like shadows, boots crunching softly on gravel as they loaded into unmarked transports. Radios whispered, weapons were checked. The silence between them wasn't tension anymore. It was readiness. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, map lit faintly by a red lamp. Every turn etched into her memory. She felt their eyes on her Chun, Vasquez, the rest of the squad waiting. For her call, she forced her voice steady, calm. We moved to grid 27 by 05. Insertion point's a collapsed warehouse, 1 click east of the objective. No lights, no chatter. Stay sharp. We don't know who's watching. They nodded, obedient, trusting. It should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like standing on a cliff's edge, knowing one wrong step could take them all down with her. The drive was short, tense. Gunfire echoed faintly in the distance, sporadic, undirected, not close enough to threaten, just close enough to remind them where they were. At the warehouse, they dismounted, moving under cover of darkness. The building sagged under its own weight, rusted beams exposed, windows shattered. Sarah gave quick hand signals, her squad melting into position like smoke. For a moment, crouched in the dirt, Sarah's breath faltered. The scene was too familiar. The smell of dust and oil, the whisper of radios, the knowledge that unseen eyes could already be sighting down scopes. It was Afghanistan all over again. The valley, the convoy, the fire raining down. Her pulse spiked, her chest tightening. She squeezed her eyes shut. Rodriguez's voice came back to her, steady even as he bled. Don't run from it. Fight through it. Her breath steadied. Her eyes opened. She gave the signal. They moved. The town was a maze of broken streets and half-collapsed buildings. Dogs barked in the distance. Windows flickered with dim, uneven light. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Sarah led from the front, her eyes scanning, ears tuned to every creak, every echo. At the edge of the objective, they halted. The building loomed ahead, a 3-story stone structure with boarded windows and a single metal door. Faint light seeped from cracks, voices muffled inside. Vasquez crouched beside her, whispering. 2 guards front, possible patrol around back. Your call, boss. Boss, the word sat strange in her ears, but there was no time to question it. She studied the structure, ran options through her head. Fast breach risked the prisoner's life. Waiting risked discovery. She exhaled slowly. We take the back, she said, quiet. In and out before they know we're here. The squad moved, circling wide through rubble and shadows. At the rear of the building, they found the guard alone, smoking, his rifle slung lazy. Sarah moved first. No hesitation. She crept low, boots silent, every muscle tuned. When she was close enough to hear him breathe, her hand snapped up, arm locking around his throat. The struggle was brief, his body sagging as oxygen cut. She eased him down, silent, lifeless in the dirt. Her squad stared, just for a second. Not shocked, just reminded. This wasn't simulation anymore. They breached through the rear window, one by one sliding into the dark interior. The smell hit. First stale sweat, unwashed bodies, damp stone. Voices echoed from the second floor. Boots creaked above. Sarah gave a quick hand signal. Chun and Vasquez moved left. 2 others right. She took point up the stairs, rifle raised, every step measured. Halfway up, a door slammed open. A mercenary appeared, rifle rising. Sarah fired first, 1 shot, center mass. He crumpled, his weapon clattering. The sound reverberated like thunder. Through the building, shouts erupted upstairs. Boots thundered. So much for quiet. The firefight exploded. Shadows flickered with muzzle flashes. Bullets chewed into walls, sparks spraying stone. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, sharp, commanding. Chun cover. Left. Vasquez, suppress fire on that window. They obeyed instantly. Not questioning, not doubting. Sarah pushed forward, her squad fanning around her. She saw the prisoner in the corner of a room, hands bound, bloodied but alive. Guards moved to drag him, but Sarah was faster. 3 controlled bursts. 2 down. A 4th lunged, rifle raised. She met him hand to hand, slamming the butt of her weapon into his jaw, then finishing him with a clean shot. She reached the prisoner, cutting restraints. With her knife, his eyes met hers, wide with confusion. Who are you? He stammered. Doesn't matter, she said, pulling him to his feet. We're getting you out. Her squad held the line, Bullets shredding air, mercenaries falling one by one. The prisoner stumbled, weak, but Sarah half-carried him as they pushed back toward the rear exit. A grenade clattered against the floor. Down. She screamed, throwing her body over the prisoner. The blast tore the room, shrapnel biting into walls. Her ears rang, her vision blurred, but she forced herself up, dragging him through the smoke. The squad regrouped, covering their retreat. Step by step, through the ruined halls into the night. When they finally reached the warehouse, Sarah collapsed the prisoner against the wall, her chest heaving. Her squad surrounded them, adrenaline still burning. The man was alive, breathing. Saved. For a long moment, no one spoke. Just the sound of labored breaths, the ringing in their ears, the hammering of hearts. Then Vasquez let out a low whistle. "Hell of a first run, boss." The others nodded. Chun managed to grin, pain tightening. His features, not bad. Martinez, not bad at all. Sarah didn't answer. She just stared at the prisoner, at the blood on her gloves, at the smoke still rising from the town behind them. She had done it. They had done it. But as the adrenaline faded, the ghost stirred again. 30 names, etched into her back, whispered against her skin, and the question rose sharp in her chest. How many more would she carry before this war was over? Why did silence always feel louder after gunfire? The transport rumbled through the night. Headlights blacked out, engines low to avoid detection. Inside, Alpha Squad sat shoulder to shoulder, sweat cooling, adrenaline fading. The prisoner slumped, unconscious between them. The firefight was behind them, but its echoes clung to every face. Sarah sat at the front, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the shifting dark outside. She could still taste the smoke, still hear the thunder of the grenade, still feel the prisoner's weight in her arms. Alive, breathing, saved. It should have been enough, but her hands trembled in her lap, faint and uncontrollable. The way they always did after, she clenched them into fists, hiding the tremor in shadow. No one needed to see, no one needed to know. The others broke the silence first. Chun winced as he adjusted his bandage, but his grin held steady. Guess the brass knew what they were doing. Pudding. "You in charge?" Tony Vasquez snorted, shaking his head. "You kidding? I thought we were all dead the second we stepped inside. Then Martinez here. He mimed a shot, exaggerated, playful. Bam! Bam! Like it was nothing." A chuckle rippled through the squad. Relieved laughter, the kind soldiers let out only when they cheated death. Sarah forced a small smile, but said nothing. She didn't feel like laughing. Not yet. When the transport reached the safe house, the squad moved in silence, unloading gear, dragging the prisoner to a cot in the corner. A medic checked him over, muttering about fractures and blood loss, but confirmed he'd survive. Mission complete. The men settled into routine, rifles cleaned, wounds dressed, rations torn open. Vasquez cracked jokes. Chun argued over cards with another operator, the room alive with the strange, fragile joy that always followed survival. Sarah slipped outside. The night air was cold, sharp, carrying the faint smell of burning from the town they'd left in chaos. She leaned against the stone wall, exhaling hard, staring up at a sky that seemed indifferent to everything below. Her chest ached with the same old contradiction, relief, guilt, pride, sorrow. A prisoner alive because of her orders. Mercenaries dead by her hand. A squad safe for tonight, but for how long? The door creaked. Footsteps behind her. Vasquez stepped out, his usual swagger soft. He held a cigarette between his fingers, but hadn't lit it yet. "You're not celebrating?" Sarah's eyes stayed on the stars. "Not much to celebrate." He raised an eyebrow. "We pulled it off, got the package." All of us walked away breathing. "That's more than most first missions get." Her jaw tightened. "That doesn't erase the ones who didn't walk away. The men we dropped tonight. The ones we couldn't save." Vasquez studied her. His smirk faded, replaced with something quieter. You know what makes you different from most leaders I've followed? She turned her head slightly. What? You carry it. Every life, every loss. Most guys push it down. Joke it off. Drown it in whiskey. You don't. He shrugged. That's why we followed you in there. Why we'll keep following you. Sarah swallowed hard, caught off guard. By the honesty, you did good, boss, he added, flicking the unlit cigarette away. Don't let the ghosts tell you different. When he went back inside, Sarah stayed. She closed her eyes, leaned her head against the wall, and let the ghost speak anyway. Rodriguez's voice, always the loudest. Don't let it turn you into a victim. Keep fighting, she whispered back. Into the night, I'm still fighting. Back at the compound, Jake Morrison sat alone in his office. The report of Alpha Squad's first deployment glowing on his screen. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but never touched it. He'd read the lines twice, 3 times extraction successful. Prisoner secured. No friendly casualties. But it wasn't the report he saw. It was Sarah, sprinting through smoke with Chun across her back. Sarah, crouched in a kill house with blood on her hands. Clamping an artery under fire, Sarah, standing in front of the graduation hall, eyes shining with a pride she'd once sworn she'd never feel again. And now Sarah leading where he had once led. The pride was there, sharp and undeniable. But beneath it, something darker gnawed at him. Question that had haunted him since he retired. Was she succeeding where I had failed? Or was she simply carrying the burden I had been too weak to keep carrying myself? His hand drifted to the photo frame on his desk. 30 faces from that valley. Men he'd sworn to bring home. 9 ghosts who never left his side. For years. He believed stepping back was the only way to survive. But Sarah's face, her fire, her defiance, made him wonder, had he mistaken surrender for survival? The night stretched long, heavy with questions neither of them could yet answer. At the safe house, Sarah finally went inside. The squad slept in uneven rows, boots still on, rifles within arm's reach. She lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. The prisoner's ragged breathing filling the silence. Her body ached, her mind spun. She thought of Jake, his eyes when he'd pinned the insignia, his voice when he'd asked if the nightmares ever stopped. The way he had looked at her, not with pity, not with doubt, but with recognition. She thought of Rodriguez, his last words, his smile, the promise etched into her back with 30 names. And she thought of tomorrow, the next mission, the next decision, the next life that would hang in the balance of her voice. Sleep never came, but she closed her eyes anyway, whispering to the ghosts, I'll keep going. I'll keep fighting. For you. Why did the second mission feel heavier than the first? The orders were clear. Another extraction, deeper into contested ground, risk higher than before. But clarity on paper never translated to clarity in the field. Paper didn't bleed. Paper didn't scream. Paper didn't carry ghosts carved into skin. Sarah Martinez stood at the front of Alpha Squad as the transport rattled down a dirt road toward the border zone. Wind clawed through cracks in the frame, carrying the scent of smoke and fear. Her squad watched her in silence, not questioning, not mocking, just waiting. The weight of their trust pressed harder than any enemy. She thought of Jake, still back at the compound, his shadow stretching across every step she took. She thought of Rodriguez, his promise etched into her spine. She thought of the 30 names that would never stop whispering in her ear. The safe house brief replayed in her mind. Insurgents had taken over a village, using families as shields. A local doctor, the only one for miles, had been captured trying to protect his patients. The mission: secure him alive, no collateral. No excuses. Her voice cut through the roar of the transport, calm, measured. Remember civilians first. No stray fire. If you're not sure, you don't shoot. We're here to save lives, not tally kills. The men nodded. Even Vasquez, who once measured worth in numbers, dropped. Didn't argue. When they reached the village outskirts, the night pressed close. Houses sagged under bullet scars. Lanterns flickered in windows. Dogs barked and were silenced. The air was too still, too heavy. Sarah signaled the squad to spread, moving low through alleys. Every step echoed like memory. The valley in Afghanistan, the convoy burning, the air split with fire. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself forward. The target house loomed ahead, light spilling from cracked shutters. Voices inside, one shouting, angry, another pleading, weak. The doctor. Sarah's heart hammered. One wrong move and civilians died. One wrong call and her squad fell. She whispered orders, voice steady though her hands ached from the tremor she hid. Chun and another flanked left, Vasquez right. She took point, always point. Through a crack in the wall, she saw them, two insurgents, rifles slung, pacing near the doctor bound to a chair. The man's face was swollen, blood drying on his lip. But his eyes were alive, defiant. Sarah studied the angles. 2 guards inside. More could be upstairs. The squad waited for her signal, but then footsteps behind her. A child, no more than 7, clutching a broken toy, staring wide-eyed at the soldiers crouched in shadow. Time froze. One scream, and the mission was blown. One frightened cry, and everyone inside would open fire. Sarah met the child's gaze. Fear shimmered in his eyes, but there was something else to recognition. He knew these weren't the men who had hurt his village. He knew she wasn't here to kill. Sarah lifted a finger to her lips, slow, deliberate. Then she placed a hand over her heart. The boy's chest heaved. His tiny hand mimicked hers. Then he nodded just once and disappeared back into the shadows without a sound. Her throat tightened. She turned back, gave the signal. The breach was swift. Chung kicked the door. Sarah moved first. Rifle snapping to target. 2 shots. 2 guards down before they could raise their weapons. The squad surged in, covering corners. Securing the ground floor, the doctor gasped as Sarah cut his restraints. "Please," he whispered, voice raw. "My patience. We'll get you out," she said firmly. "All of you." But upstairs, the storm broke. Boots thundered. Shouts cracked like lightning. Bullets tore into walls, spraying dust and splinters, suppressing fire. Vasquez roared, unloading rounds up the staircase. Chun dragged the doctor to cover. Sarah pushed forward, heart pounding, mind split between orders and instinct. She moved like she had in the valley years ago, fear clawing at her throat, but never breaking her stride. When she reached the landing, an insurgent lunged from the hall, rifle raised. She fired point blank, his body crashing against the wall. Another appeared, grenade in hand. She didn't think. She didn't aim. She threw herself forward, slamming into him. The grenade clattering harmlessly across the floor before Chun kicked it down the stairwell. Her squad pressed hard, clearing the top floor room by room. Families huddled in corners, eyes wide with terror. Sarah lowered her weapon, her voice calm. "We're here to help. Stay low. Stay quiet." One by one, they led them down, women, children, the old. The squad formed a shield around them, rifles out, eyes sharp. When they finally spilled into the night, Sarah felt her chest loosen for the first time. The doctor stumbled beside her. Civilians pressed close, the squad circling them like a living wall. Gunfire echoed behind them. But no one followed, not yet, not tonight. By the time they reached the extraction point, dawn had begun to bleed across the horizon, a faint, fragile light painting the sky. The helicopter descended, rotor wash whipping dust and tears alike. Civilians clutched one another, climbing aboard with shaking hands. The doctor grasped Sarah's arm before stepping inside. His voice was rough, but certain. "You saved more than me. You saved hope." She had no words, only a nod, when the last civilian was loaded. The squad piled in. The helicopter lifted, the village shrinking beneath them. Smoke curling into the pale morning, Sarah sat near the open hatch, wind tearing at her hair, eyes fixed on the horizon. Vasquez leaned across, shouting over the roar. 2 missions in, boss. Still breathing. You might just be the real deal. The others chuckled, the sound ragged but real. Sarah didn't laugh. She simply stared ahead, her hands steady on her rifle, her back aching with the weight of 30 names. Later, when the squad collapsed into bunks, Sarah found herself alone. Again, she stood before a cracked mirror, the insignia on her chest catching the dim light. She peeled off her shirt slowly, her reflection showing the truth she never escaped. The tattoo glistened with sweat. 30 names, a battlefield cross, coordinates. But tonight, they didn't feel like a curse. Tonight, they felt like a promise kept. She touched her spine, her fingers tracing the lines. Sometimes she still felt broken. Sometimes the ghost screamed too loud. But standing here, alive, her squad breathing in the next room, civilians safe because of her choices, she understood something she hadn't before. Dignity wasn't loud. It didn't demand. It didn't scream for recognition. It endured. It carried. It acted. And as the dawn spread wider, Sarah Martinez whispered the words her fallen brothers never heard, but always deserved. I'll carry you. Always. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.